Hi, everybody. You are listening to Eve Harow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. This is being recorded on January 30th, 2020, the fourth day of Shvat, 5780. And actually, this is going to be a slightly different show because I'm going to be on the other side of the mic in honor of about, maybe now it's a couple more, 200 shows that I have put out with the help, of course, of Ben Bresky and Tabitha on the Land of Israel Network and many, many other ones that I've done over the years. It was requested of me that I be interviewed because apparently some of you, my listeners, would like to know a little bit more about who's been talking to you for all these years. So approached Yisrael Medad, who many of you have heard interviewed on this show and on many others, who's an old friend and who's known me for a long time. And Yisrael Medad, Winky is his nickname, graciously agreed to interview me for today's show. So first of all, Wink, thank you so much for joining me today on Rejuvenation.
Eve, thank you very much for having me on in a different position, going back to many years ago when I was on Arutz Sheva for almost 6 years, right, with our own weekly broadcast. So now I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Okay? We're on the land,
as they say. I deserve it. Yes.
We're on the Land of Israel movement. Everybody knows that you love the Land of Israel. Let's introduce you to everybody, saying, where does your love of the Land of Israel come from?
That should be an easy answer, and it's actually not. I first came to Israel when I was 8 years old. My father is a Palestinian. He's a German Jew who was raised in Jerusalem when they fled Nazi Germany. He came as a baby in the early 1930s. And we came when I was 8 years old for a wedding of one of his cousins who was still living in Israel. My parents had left Israel before I was born, so I was being raised in the United States. I was 8 years old, and I fell in love with Israel. I cannot explain it to this day. I just felt at home here in a way that I've never felt anywhere else. It wasn't coming from a particular religious place either. We were conservative, the way a lot of American Jews, like a little mishmash of this and that. I was getting a Jewish education, and that's kudos to my mother for that. She's a Hebrew teacher and felt very strongly that we get a day school education. But I just, it's beyond anything I can describe. And now I realize how young I was.
I was going to say,
yeah.
Eve, you were 8 years old. What could you have conceived of at that time and understood?
It wasn't.
Was it the sun? Was it the traffic?
It was actually a pretty miserable trip. My paternal grandfather, who'd been estranged from my father for many years, had finally come to visit us and had a heart attack and died while he was visiting us. We were living at the time in New Jersey. So the first thing that we did when we got to Israel was actually bury him. So there was, I don't really recall exactly what was going on. My father must have been sitting some sort of shiva, and I must have had some time to myself where they maybe weren't really paying attention to me. I don't really know. But I can't explain it in any logical terms. Many, many years later, when I learned about the concept of Gilgul Neshamot, the fact that your soul keeps coming back and you have different lifetimes, then maybe it made sense to me that I had a Land of Israel soul, that some part of my sojourn in the past was deeply connected to this place.
Before we move on, you mentioned Palestinian Jew.
Yeah.
So this program is also just a little bit political
just
sometimes.
A little.
How can there be a Palestinian Jew? Would you like to explain to
well, just
our
because
audience?
That he came in 1933 when the Nazis came to power. They were living in Berlin. He was just 6 months old. And my grandfather realized that they needed to get out. Unfortunately, a lot of other people, the family and friends, did not believe what was going to happen and never got out. But the Jews at the time were the ones who were called the Palestinians. It's not until 1948 and the creation of the modern day state of Israel that the Jews and the Arabs living within its borders become Israelis. And the term Palestinian becomes, attached to another group of people. But yeah, he's got Palestinian papers.
I'm going to add here that basically it was only because of the British that a country called Palestine arose.
Yeah.
Before that, it was like a region or some sort of...
It was Syria, Palestine, southern Syria. I mean, if you look at the papers
right.
then. And obviously the Jewish newspaper that we now know, the Jerusalem-based newspaper that we now know is the Jerusalem Post, was called the Palestine Post. And one of the more upsetting things, and that's saying something. When I go through the old city today, for example, and I see posters being sold at stores, "Come to Palestine," and they're being sold by Arab shopkeepers in an effort to push this idea that they're the Palestinians. And of course, these are old posters, 100 years old posters that were being distributed in the Jewish world to get people to come and to start this massive, major, and so exciting undertaking of the rejuvenation, if you will, of Jewish life in the land of Israel. And this is before the state and before the Holocaust.
We mentioned New Jersey, we mentioned Palestine.
Yeah.
Now let's jump over to a little bit to Los Angeles. You're from the West Coast. I'm from the East Coast. So what was it like growing up there in the sense of you being Jewish or you beginning to become Zionist? Was there anything special that you remember from childhood or teenage years that really pushed you more into where you are today?
So soon after that trip to Israel, a few months later, we moved to Los Angeles. My father was transferred there, and that's where I ended up growing up. We were put in Orthodox day school because that was the one that was available. In New Jersey, it had been Solomon Schechter. And so while we weren't practicing Orthodox Judaism at home, I certainly was learning all about it. Plus, my maternal grandparents and aunt and uncle, because my mother comes from an Orthodox home, were tremendous role models for me.
If I'm not mistaken, they were more from Chabad than even Orthodox.
There are Chabad roots, but here in America, what my grandparents succeeded in doing, my maternal grandparents, is staying religious. What happened to their family when they came over from Russia is what happened to many Jewish families. They came to where the streets were paved with gold country, and many of them left the Jewish world. But my grandparents were still, even though they never succeeded financially, because my grandfather couldn't get jobs sometimes because they insisted he work on Saturday, on Shabbat, and he refused to. So they were tremendous role models. They passed away when I was 16, which is way too young. But my aunt and uncle also, who are still very much present in my life, and he's an Orthodox rabbi. I interviewed him last year. So they were also very important role models for me. And eventually, as I became a little bit older, 10, 11, 12, I realized that this mishmash that I was living wasn't fitting. I thought, oh, this whole thing is stupid. Let me try not being religious at all, but that didn't feel good. And so I gradually started adding different traditions. It was not easy. My father was not very accepting of my turn towards religion because of his background. He just had very negative attitudes towards Israel and towards Judaism, unfortunately. But I persevered. I just felt that there was something calling me. And I have felt that until this very minute, that Hashem is very much present. It's not an abstract, certainly not a guy with a beard sitting on a fluffy cloud somewhere. But when I need strength, which is quite often, that for me is what Hashem is a force that believes in me, that is giving me the strength and sometimes the wisdom to do things, and the encouragement and the unconditional love. So I don't know if that's how other people interpret God in their lives, but that for me was more of an emotional attachment even before it was a religious attachment, was just understanding that the creator of the world believed in me. And if he believed in me, then I needed to believe in myself. And that got me through some not so simple times. One thing I realized is that if I was going to move to Israel, which, as I said, from age 8, I was determined to live here, that I needed to marry somebody who shared the same dreams. Because Los Angeles is a very comfortable place to live. And it was going to be hard to come. You ask about my Zionism. I'll get back to my husband in a minute. You asked about my Zionism.
Were you in a Zionist youth movement, for example?
So I wasn't allowed to go to B'nai Akiva until I was a bit older, which is a Zionist youth movement. And then when I was already 15 or 16, I started going. And that is where I met my husband. B'nai Akiva is a modern Orthodox youth movement, very Zionist. And that was very important in my life. But even before then, I remember the Soviet Jewry movement. I just got in touch a few weeks ago, and I hope to be able to interview her, with the daughter of Silva Zalmanson. Silva Zalmanson
She made a film about her mother.
Yes, exactly. And her name is Anat. So Silva Zalmanson was one of the big names in the Soviet Jewry movement. For those of you who don't remember, before the wall comes down and the Iron Curtain falls down, and a lot of the reason for that, and it didn't just fall down, were people who were really trying very hard to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union, and she was one of them who had been arrested. And what we did in Los Angeles, and I'm sure in other places as well, is we wore bracelets with their name on it. So now when I look back now, I realize that that's probably the first active thing I did for Zionism. I wore Silva Zalmanson on my wrist for years until she got out. And just a few weeks ago, I was in touch with her again, and I hope to interview her. I was in touch with her daughter because she has become an outstanding artist. She lives in Israel, and her work is just breathtaking. But so it's already been a while that I cared about other Jews.
I happen to know about that because we have a personal a friend of ours, both you and I, Barbara Oberman.
Yes.
Who started the 35s in London based on Silva Zalmanson, who was 35 at that time.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
wow.
See, everything comes about.
Yeah.
Okay, you're committed to Israel. You've turned religious. You've gone into B'nai Akiva. You've met your future husband.
Yes, exactly.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
So he comes from a family that are tremendous Zionists to this day. My in-laws, today is my mother-in-law's 15th, the anniversary of her passing, her yortzeit, as it were. They were tremendous Zionists, very involved in the Los Angeles community, building synagogues. He would be the doctor at the B'nai Akiva camp. They made Aliyah in their 70s. Virtually my husband's entire family, except for one sibling, they are here. Nieces and nephews. There are literally hundreds probably now of their descendants, most of whom live in Israel and most of whom live very devoted Jewish lives, which is not such an easy thing. So I met my husband. Of course, I didn't know any of this, though, at the time. This was all in the last few decades. But I did meet him in B'nai Akiva camp. And the first time he asked me out, I couldn't go because it was my Sweet 16. So we put it off for a week. And then we dated. I came to Israel for a year to go to Hebrew U. In the middle, because I was desperate to get to Israel any way I could. Although I have to admit that I didn't spend very much time in class. I spent most of that year in the Sinai Desert, which Israel, you're talking about 1979. So Israel was still in control of the Sinai Desert, and just really roaming around the country and falling even more deeply in love with this country, and committing myself to one day coming here and to raising a family. But once we got married, when I was 20, he was in medical school. I was studying dentistry because
dentistry.
Because
Can you I happen to remember that your degree actually is in psychology.
It is in psychology, but people said to us, doctors don't do well in Israel. It's socialized medicine, but dentists do well because it's private. So we said, okay, he'll become the doctor and I'll become the dentist. So after we got married in June of 81, I moved to St. Louis. That's where he was already in medical school. And I graduated from Washington University, which is an excellent school. It really is. Only now, I think, is it getting the recognition that it deserved. At the time, it was more known for what was it? The sex therapist that there was a show about
Johnson and Masters?
Yeah, Masters and Johnson. So they worked out of Washington University, and I was a psych major. So, I had to take their classes. People were crawling in the windows to get into the class. It was a very interesting time. But I was pre-dent. I got into UCLA dental school. So we moved back to Los Angeles. My husband finished his education there. But our oldest daughter, Elisheva, who herself today is now mother of 6, beautiful, amazing woman, had already been born. I was taking my chem classes trying not to breathe because I had this big pregnant tummy at the very end of my degree. And I didn't like dentistry. I loved the environment at UCLA and, the whole scientific environment. Maybe I should have gone into medicine when I think about it, but I didn't like the dentistry enough to stick with it. So I left after less than a year. I moved over, as you said, to psych grad school. I got my master's degree. We had 2 more children while I was getting my degree, and my husband was finishing his training. And then we'd been married 7 years, and I'd been accepted to the doctoral program, the PhD program. And I really wanted a doctorate so badly, but I was concerned that we would end up not making Aliyah because my husband had finished his training. He needed to open some kind of practice. Our oldest was already 5, needed to start her in school. And I just felt it was 1988. If we didn't go now, we weren't going to go. We would get stuck.
So you
many
moved
people do.
to Israel.
So we moved to Israel. I left my doctorate behind. 7 months after we moved here, our first Israeli was born, Amiad. We ended up having 7 children. We came with 3. We had another 4 after we got here, 4 daughters and 3 sons. And I was very busy. We soon after that had another daughter. So I was 30 years old with 5 kids under the age of 8.
And you were living by this time in?
We were living in Efrat.
In Efrat.
We moved to Efrat.
Was that your first choice, or was it?
Yeah, we wanted to live around Jerusalem. My husband wanted to start a practice in Jerusalem. So we looked around, and at the time, look, it was 1988. The first Intifada had just started in 1987, like the first rumblings that things maybe weren't going to be as easy as we hoped that they would be. We were only the 300th family to move into Efrat. Efrat was only 5 years old. But we decided to go. There were enough people like us there that we felt that we could fit in and make friends.
When I first met you in Efrat, I can't remember if already you were on the municipal council, but I do remember you with a group of 3 other ladies who were a little bit active.
Yeah.
So how'd you move into activism?
I still look back and don't quite understand what happened. I was incredibly shy. Believe it or not, incredibly shy with very little self-confidence. Never spoke in front of groups of people, nothing like that. I was not what you would call an extrovert in any way, shape, or form. But 1992 came, 1993, and the Oslo Accords were signed. And I realized that somebody had to do something, and the somebody was going to have to also be me, because here we have to do it ourselves very often. And so I became active in advocacy and speaking to people that were coming out to Gush Etzion, which is where Efrat is, and trying to maybe meet settlers or figure out exactly what this was all about. So I started doing that quietly in little groups. Then I was elected to the Efrat local council. I ended up serving 2 5-year terms. I ended up serving 10 years on the council. Our last 2 children were born while I was a member. So I would leave the meetings to go nurse them and then come back. And so
what did you do on the council?
So,
did you raise your hand, or did you do something
so
actual?
At the beginning, I was very intimidated. For often, I was the only woman and the only Olah, the only non-Israeli born. My Hebrew got a lot better after making catastrophically embarrassing mistakes. And it took me a long time to read the reports and to read the minutes of the meetings, much longer than anybody else. But I felt it was really important. It's a volunteer position. It took a lot of time. I was on the opposition the entire time. It was not my mayor of choice. And it was also very difficult times because we were dealing with Oslo in the summer of, and this is possibly what you're referring to, in the summer of 1995, when my son Matanya was only 4 months old, the Givat Dagan, which is the northernmost hill of Efrat, we were afraid going to be turned over to Bethlehem. We abut Bethlehem, and this is the hill that's right in between, and we were very worried that it was actually going to be attached to Bethlehem. It was not. There was no neighborhood there yet. It was not yet officially.
And it's a very strategic place.
Strategic,
geographically, topographically.
Strategic, but also, here we were whittling away at more and more and more at the Jewish communities. It was clear to many of us that Yasser Arafat was not a peacemaker. I remember when Oslo was signed, going out and looking out in Bethlehem, which we were now giving up, and the birthplace of David and all of the history there. And we were driving through there, and the road to our communities led through Bethlehem, and people would shop there and drive through. And I remember just sobbing and thinking, aren't people seeing that this is not going to lead to peace? So we had a massive demonstration that summer. We went up there with tents. It was spearheaded by 4 women, although there were plenty of other people who were involved behind the scenes. Nadia Matar, who's now become very well known as Women in Green and the Sovereignty Movement. Sharon Katz, who's also very, very involved with films and newspapers, and she's in plays and shows and prolific. And Marilyn Adler, who's also an expert in geriatrics. And the 4 of us, with a whole lot of help, went up on that hill. We were there for 2 weeks. I remember a few things. One is I lost 10 pounds. I had a baby, and I was still carrying around the extra weight. And I thought, I could put out a book, The Dagan Diet. I nursed my son Matanya in jail because at some point we got taken off the mountain by the army, black and blue for weeks, put into jail in Bethlehem, and then let out. Someone brought him to me. It was a really crazy time. But we managed to save the hill. It didn't go to Bethlehem. And now there's a neighborhood there My son Donnie and his wife and two of my grandchildren live on the Dagan, and I was just out there the other day, and some of what we found has now been fenced off. Part of the ancient aqueduct system that the Hasmoneans built, and that was later made even bigger and developed even more by Herod the Great, because Efrat is higher than Jerusalem, and that's how we would get water to the temple and the old city. So we found some of the wells, we found some of that system, a phenomenal system that was built, and we brought out Menashe Aharel, who was a historian of that time period, and that was an exciting discovery.
Eve, we're going to get back a little bit to those political areas in current contemporary talk,
yes.
But I think this is a great time to say this is basically where perhaps you thought maybe you'd become a tour guide by exploring and discovering, or when did it come into your mind that instead of doing political stuff, you do tour guiding?
So I call myself, like, I think, the accidental activist, because I never really planned it all that far ahead. It just, things happened, I got involved. If I did it well, then I got more involved. And I didn't really have like a long-term plan about what I was going to do. I did start getting involved politically with Rav Benny Alon, may he rest in peace, and some of the political parties at the time, clearly to the right, the ones who were against Oslo and had alternate plans for what should be done. I quickly realized, though, that national politics wasn't for me. It's a really dirty arena and very difficult. And I just didn't feel that that's where I could do my best job. And I don't know if I could have gotten in. They're always looking for women, let's face it. So being a woman would have been an advantage. But I just didn't feel that I could do the best job there, that there are other people who are built for it better, but also it didn't sit right. It just didn't sit right. There's a lot of nastiness. I want everybody to do well. And politics is a pyramid, and in order to get higher, you have to scramble on other people. And it just didn't feel comfortable for me. So I decided to support certain people from the side, but not actually get into it on my own. Tour guiding, I don't think I was thinking of it at the time. I mean, I loved the land. I was taking journalists around the land. Later on in 2005, I moved down to Gush Katif before the expulsion. Won't call it a disengagement. And so the tour guiding came much later. I was also very busy with 7 young children, and I couldn't do something. Tour guiding, really, to do it well, you have to be very devoted, and it's time away from the home also, sometimes even overnights. So it wasn't something that I could practically do. My focus was still my kids and the family, and so I was very involved more in the local issues, but not really thinking about tour guiding. That came about 12 or 13 years ago when a mutual friend of ours, Ruthie Lieberman, who herself was in the tour guide course, said to me, I think you would love this class. I mean, you love Israel, you love the history. A lot of people just take the course to take the course. So believe it or not, I was torn between that and interior design, because by that time we had built and sold a house in Efrat and then built another one in one of the newer neighborhoods. And you thought you had enough experience? No, well, I loved it. I love putting things together and colors, and maybe in another life also, I don't know, I'll be an architect. I just loved all of that, and building something. So those were my two choices. Do I become a tour guide or do I become interior designer?
Right, let's take just one step backwards.
Sure.
To not exactly insert myself, but to share experiences. During those years, there was an awful lot of English language, what we call in Hebrew hasbara, information campaigns going on television and radio. Let's hear a little bit about that, because
that's
we were
why
active
I met
then.
you, Wink.
Okay.
All right. I believe it was Moetzet Yesha that had a seminar, maybe remind me, to train people, because
at the
it was
Hebrew
clear.
University, I think it was the first area that we did.
Yeah. I mean, it was clear that there weren't enough people trained in doing advocacy properly, because it's as you know better than almost anybody, it's a tough argument to make. We need time. The other side can just stand up and say they are killing our children and show a picture of a kid with a rock against a tank, and then they pretty much don't have to say anything else. But we have to talk about the Balfour Declaration and the Bible and the rights and the different wars, and we need to do it succinctly and what they did wrong. And there's so much. And so, again, I had never taken a course in public speaking or in anything like that. But maybe because, and I still believe that it came from my heart. so that I was able to, and also...
That's the best place.
It's the best place. But also when I look back now on a fairly lonely childhood, meant that I spent a lot of time reading. And when I look back now, that was a preparation for what I've done now. I amassed a lot of knowledge, both about history, but just in general, a fairly high level of erudition, shall we say, in the English language, which also matters. And so I see that a lot of the things that at the time, and I think this is in general, we should all think about this in life, that when you're going through a hard time and you think you're just kind of, you don't really understand what's happening, you're being built for something else. Whether it's emotionally or whether it's the time that you're spending, that if Hashem has a plan for you, and that I deeply, deeply believe He's always had a plan for me, then those things all needed to be done in order to put me where I am today. So that helped tremendously.
I've heard you say a lot of times, I'm walking and talking the land.
Yes.
That's become basically a slogan, shall we say?
That's my WhatsApp tag also,
Okay.
which makes it really important.
Let's explain to the people on the background of what you just said now, what that really means for you. Walking and talking the land.
Right. So I know the land, I walk the land. So I physically know the contours of the land, and not just the biblical sites, the weather patterns, what grows here.
Rock formations.
The rock formations. Yeah, I know. It sounds so silly, geology, but it really does make a difference as to where people live. It's a very exciting place in an area that's maybe the size of New Jersey, if you're a North American. We have so many variations in the land. So there's that. But I also talk the land because I know Tanakh. One of the joys of becoming a tour guide, the Bible, is being able to put the Tanakh, the Bible, in 3D, is to be able to go to a place and say, this is where this happened, and this is why. See how it says that they came up through a valley, or there was an ambush, and you can see how it played out here, or the foods that they were eating, if it's the vineyards in Binyamin, which is an integral part of the story, if it's crossing the Jordan River, well, obviously, near Jericho, right, when we come with Joshua, and to stand there and see all of that, it never gets old. There's some places that I must have gone to literally hundreds of times, and because I look at it through the eyes of the tourists and the people that I'm with, it excites me all over again. And I'm just amazed that we can do this.
Give us a story with some famous or not famous person you took along that sort of maybe gives us an example of you explaining to him or her, and then, opening the eyes of the person you're with. Because I think that I'm not a professional tour guide, but I've done a little bit of it. The feeling you get when you're talking to someone, you're trying to explain something, and all of a sudden the eyes open. Oh, now I see what you're talking about.
So without mentioning names, one of the more exciting places to go is Har Bracha, it's known as Mount Gerizim.
In Samaria.
It overlooks Shechem, which is also known as Nablus, meaning Neapolis, a new city. The Romans destroyed the ancient city of Shechem and built a new city there, Neapolis, known as Nablus because there's no P in Arabic. So you stand on Mount Gerizim on what's called Joseph's Lookout and talk about the blessings and the curses. We come in with Joshua, and there's an altar that's built there on the other side on Mount Eval. And the nation is divided, 6 tribes on one hill and 6 tribes on another. And essentially the blessings and curses are given, meaning what good things will happen to you if you follow God's ways, and the downside if you don't. And you have to imagine that the whole nation is sitting there. And so I tell people just to be quiet for a minute. We're standing there. And I say, just listen. And you can hear cars, you can hear the horns of cars down from the valley, which is very far away. And I say, the Bible is very laconic. So in the Bible, it doesn't, how did everybody hear? I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are all hearing. There are no microphones. What's happening here? And I said, they're hearing because there's this very interesting acoustic chamber right in that valley. The Romans knew it also. They built a theater there many years later where the sound reverberates. And so I say, stand up here. And if you can hear the horns down in the valley, you can imagine standing here as part of whatever tribe you were in and hearing the Levites and hearing the text. And we read the text being spoken. And this is inevitably an aha moment because the Bible doesn't say that this is an acoustic chamber. That's not, maybe because it figured everybody knew at the time.
Or you thought it
or
was
maybe
a miracle.
It's just not, that's not the gist of the story. And then you stand there and you realize how they actually did hear it from the same spot that we're standing. And that is inevitably because, so much of our learning is visual learning, especially as a tour guide, you take people to places and you normally are, looking at where it happened. And to be able to understand how it happened orally, AU, is like another level. And then they start realizing how, if they haven't realized it already, how we are just connected, how the stories happened here, and how all of our history is here. And it's that really stands out. There are other moments also, of course, where you just see someone's eyes light up, and especially when they have their own experience. I've taken Christians, for example, down to the Jordan River crossing, we crossed with Joshua, and where the Christians have their tradition that Jesus is baptized, and taken them to be baptized. And I'm not a Christian, but I am very much moved by their experience and seeing the joy on their face and being able to accomplish something that has been a dream of theirs for a long time. So it becomes an emotional experience all the way around. It's not just a trip. It's a journey into your soul. It's a journey into connecting with God on whatever level that's going to be. And to a great degree, I think with humanity, because the mores of humanity come from the Bible, whether people realize that or not. And this is the land of the Bible. So you meet all of these things together, and sometimes it can actually be somewhat overwhelming.
Okay, we'll stick with experiences. We mentioned that you managed to get into media in an early stage and simply by being on the media itself. Any funny or odd or angry moments that you remember, whether it's CNN, BBC, or some sort of local or foreign thing that you like to give our listening audience what you had to go through yourself? Because we're talking about you, Eve.
Yeah.
What was it like to represent hundreds of thousands of Israelis and their rights and their privileges and their duties to an audience that is maybe not knowing anything?
Well, it's a privilege. It's a privilege that people on our side of the political spectrum, many think highly of me. It's something that I do not take for granted. It's also a huge responsibility to measure my words. And in a very, very difficult situation, also to control my emotions. It's something that I had to learn to do, because there were times, especially, let's say, after somebody was killed, like we've had, those years where buses were being blown up constantly, where my own niece's baby was killed, Yehuda Shoham, your neighbor in Shiloh, friends and neighbors. And when something like that happens, you just it's coming from a very deep place of hurt. So it was constantly forcing myself to think of the goal of where I wanted to go. It wasn't an opportunity for me to vent, because that was a privilege that I didn't have. And so, yes, there were years where I was on CNN and on different newscasts, very frustrating to have my words twisted, which was very often what happens. And I watched a lot of other people who were involved with the media quit being involved with the media because they were just too frustrated. And totally understandably, when you say one thing and it's interpreted as another, and then people get upset with you, how could you say that? And of course, you didn't say it that way. And to make us all look like crazy people living on hilltops who just, hated everybody and didn't care what anybody thought, was very difficult. And I did it anyway, because I realized that somebody had to do it. And so I would get out there. And also, the main thing that still drives me until this very moment is I need to keep my children safe, and now my grandchildren. So most of my children served in the Army, and were keeping me safe. So what can I do? I came to Israel too late to serve in the Army or to do national service. And so what can I do for my people? So this is my service, or in Hebrew, shlichut. This is what I'm doing for my people, and I have to keep doing it. And there's been a learning curve, and I've made many, many mistakes over the years and things I wished that I could take back. But you learn from those experiences, and you go into others. We all have to keep trying. But I think that everybody has to choose something that they can do for the Jewish people and do it. And so I am blessed to have been put in a position where I can do something for the Jewish people. I've been given the skills to be able to do it, which is something I'm grateful for every single day. I don't take any of this for granted because it wasn't a natural progression. And that's where I come from. But always it's my kids in my mind. You know, if I'm going to say or do something, is this going to make the situation better or worse?
And then, unless you correct me, the next phase is basically you turn around and get on the other side of the microphone. How did you get into broadcasting?
So for that, I have to thank Yishai Fleischer, whom all my listeners know. He interviewed me also many years ago. I'd already met you, and you had done a lot of the training for me in advocacy. I have to put that in there because of your tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience, having worked in the Knesset, and you're all over the place, and you deserve the kudos. But then Yishai interviewed me, and when the mic went off, said to me, you know, I think you could do this. And I just said, He said, no, I really think that you could be a good interviewer. And so I started first on Arutz Sheva. Ben's been with me since the very, very beginning. He's sitting here quietly, but he has...
We thank Ben for everything.
He has, without Ben, I don't think I would be here today, I have to say, because he has had a tremendous amount of patience and the guy always behind the scenes, but so important to all of us. And so first it was the little studios in Beit El where I used to go to every week.
Remember them well.
I remember them well for Arutz Sheva, and I had my show first Sunday Eve, and then we called it Judean Eve. And then for 1 year we had a studio, and we had what was called the Voice of Israel, although that soon went under. And that was very exciting because many of us who were working on radio got to meet with each other. We had a studio.
Where everybody
talk.
sat together.
Everyone would meet. The conversations in the halls, I think, were sometimes a whole lot more interesting than what ended up on the mic. And there was some kind of synergy. Ruthie Bloom was there. She was editing a lot of the shows.
Benny Seidman.
And she's a rock star, Ruthie. I hope all of you read what she writes. So that was a very exciting year. Unfortunately, it didn't last. And so here we are now on the Land of Israel Network. So it's been many, many years. Many interviews. I'm now going to be, I think, putting together a book. Somebody that I guided, for whom those 2 weeks in Israel was a life-changing experience, wants me to write a book based on the podcast, because I've really interviewed just awesome people over the years and put them out with some of my thoughts and conclusions. Some of them are no longer alive.
That's a great idea, by the way.
Yeah, so that's where I'm going to be actually starting that next week. I'm heading to the States. When you're listening to this interview, I'll already be on my way there. And that's one of my projects for this year, is to try and put that together. Because not everybody has the patience for podcasts, or not everybody's going to go back and listen to the old ones. And so we're going to try and put that together so that some of the words of some very exceptional people, Charles Krauthammer, for example, I had a short interview with him. He's no longer with us. And also I think the perspective of years, is here we are at the cusp of who knows what, some kind of super exciting time and the deal of the century. And you and I have been for decades already watching the ups and the downs and the elections and the plans signed and the terrorism and certain hopes and certain huge disappointments. And here we are again on this mad roller coaster that we're living on.
We got tour guide. We got activist. We got the media personality, and we've got everything else. I think the next stage I'm supposed to touch on is you've been making appearances literally around the world. You've become a public speaker, coming out from behind the microphone and putting completely yourself out there. I know you've been at Limud, which is an English experience. I think you've been to Australia a couple of years ago. You've been to the States now several times. How'd you get into this, and what are your impressions? Is it something you want to stick with?
I absolutely do. Not only do I want to stick with it, I want to develop it. There's a little niche here that's been created. The tour guiding is phenomenal, but it means people have to be here, right? They have to be coming to Israel. I don't guide outside of Israel. My husband and I travel as much as we can outside of Israel, especially to Europe. And what we're doing is we're with the Jews. So I was in Portugal. I did a show on that, my listeners know, which tremendously affected me and completely changed the way I guide Tzfat, for example, which had to do with the Inquisition.
Kabbalists.
And so the knowledge and the experience and what I see in different countries, I also bring back into my guiding here, to my understanding of our journey as a people, to my guiding here in Israel. But again, that involves people being here, and also it's not an inexpensive enterprise. Okay, to take a private tour guide is somewhat of a luxury and beyond the means of people. And of course, just physically getting here to Israel isn't always something people can do. And then there's the podcast, but that's not so intimate. I mean, you're hearing my voice, but there's a certain disconnect. So I already started years ago. Australia, I was there 25 years ago. I would love to go back to Australia. But yes, I went to Limud, UK, which tends very much to the left. It's a week or a few days of
Jewish learning. It's a challenge for people like us.
Very challenging, but I think it's important to go, specifically because one of the things that I've been doing in my 50s, and in a couple of weeks' time, I will be 59, which is hard for me to believe. But one of the things that I've been doing in my 50s is getting out of my own way and getting out of my comfort zone, whether it's ziplining in Costa Rica or whitewater rafting in Montenegro or jumping out of an airplane with my daughter, whatever it is, scuba diving in Thailand. I don't want to be afraid of things. It's easy to go live in fear, as we've learned all too well here in Israel. And so the other thing to do that is to get out and to bring Israel to other people. So already for the last few years, I've been going to synagogues and to churches and to community centers. It can be political if that's what they want. I can certainly talk about Judea and Samaria, but very often it's not political at all. I could be living, in Tel Aviv for the talk that I'm giving. It's about some of the research that I've done on the land. My favorite topic is the rejuvenation of certain spices and scents and food and wines that we're now seeing here in Israel. And I bring the wine, and I bring, that has now been discovered. So I have PowerPoints on that.
Things literally come back to life in the land of life.
Literally. I mean, other things I hate to use the term because it's so fraught, resurrected. But there are certain things that we thought were dead that are not. In the right circumstances, they can be brought back. So I love doing that. And I also have my favorite archaeologist, and he passed away, Dr. Adam Zertal, who I also was able to interview just for a few minutes before he passed away. And he did the survey on Menashe, which is the bulk of Samaria, and found these odd foot-shaped structures. And I have a PowerPoint that I made up on that. So I just try and get people to realize that Israel is much beyond what they read in the headlines and the negativity and the war and the constant conflict. There's so many exciting things happening here.
Is there an audience for it?
There is an audience for that. Mizrahi, I want to shout out to the Mizrahi, the Religious Zionists of America organization, that is now they have a speakers bureau, and I've gone there for them a couple of times to the States.
To
this year I'm going to England. In London, they have their Israel weekend in May, and through Mizrahi, and I've been invited to there this year. And look, right now I'm in a position where I can still walk and talk at the same time, and even chew gum. Thank God, I'm in a healthy place in my life. My kids are big. My youngest is 23, so I don't have to rush home by 2:00 in the afternoon, pick people up from school anymore. I feel like I have a few years now of being able to take many of the gifts and many of the skills and a lot of the hard work that I've done over the years and put it together. And I feel, I wouldn't say a sense of desperation because that's a negative connotation, but the time is clicking. And as the years go on, we're finding that anti-Semitism is coming back, and all these things that we thought we'd kick those cans at least down the road a little bit are all coming back. And anything we can do to correct the lies and get the truth out about Israel and how very real and the challenges we have here. I don't believe in Pollyanizing, if that's, I just made a verb out of.
Would you consider going to college campuses?
I would, if they would have me. But right now, the safe spaces on the college campuses apparently are places where you don't have to be challenged. The exact opposite of what campuses should be. But I would go anywhere. And I've done debates, and I've debated Palestinian Arabs, and I've debated left-wing Jews. And I'll do that. I'll do one-on-one. I just feel that very often our voice, I'll say that collectively here, Wink, is not heard enough. And I will do what I can because that's the legacy that I want to leave. I want people to say she loved Israel, she loved the Jewish people, she loved God, and she gets an A for effort. She did whatever she could with the skills that she was given, or to overcome the difficulties that she had, in order to make sure that that got out there, and that nobody is ever going to think, nor should they, nor do I, that Israel and the Jewish people are perfect. Far from. But there are a lot of lies out there that have to be dealt with.
Okay. Is there anything we could be doing better? And I'm talking collectively, because you're only part, a big part, but you're only part. You mentioned Yishai. There are other people.
Yourself. You.
Okay. Well, we'll be humble for the next 2 seconds. But step back a second and say, okay, I've been doing this. What could we be doing better?
Look, unfortunately, a lot of it comes back to funding. And it seems like the organizations on the left have an endless amount of funds at their disposal, also to take people to court for land, here in Israel that might not be theirs, and that they can pay all the court fees and try and, make the Jewish family go under. There has never really been, like the George Soros, if you will, who funds a lot of the evil, I will say that on the left. I don't think that some of the wealthy people who have the same belief system that you and I have, or see the things the same way you and I do, I don't think they have appreciated enough the war of words and the war of ideas. And so there's a lot of different organizations out there doing a lot of different things, but there needs to be really a plan on how we are going to get the truth out to a great degree, or at least get the discussion going. Even if people, I don't mind if people hear us and then say, look, I disagree with you. Fine, I disagree with you. But at least have the discussion, and at least say, look, I see where you're coming from. You're coming from a good place. You're a mother. You care. I disagree with your conclusions. That's fine. But we're not even being allowed to have the conversation. And unfortunately, a lot of that has to do with, the fact that people haven't thought that this was an important enough battleground to invest in. And that's been very, very frustrating, as over the years. And, then we have politicians who get involved who are not necessarily the best spokespeople. Politics is a different playing ground altogether. And so that's been that's been a major difficulty. So in the meantime, some of us have created our own little niches, but we have to do it on our own, meaning when I go and I'm a scholar in residence, that synagogue or that church pays me, because there's no one that I'm working for who's going to send me to do it, like you have with different things. Right. So that also is limiting, but we're working it through.
Any sort of initiatives, besides funding, that what if you had $100,000, what would you do beyond what you and I are doing now in terms of talking over the Land of Israel radio network? But give us an idea of what you would like to change in the idea of presenting Israel, and how.
All right, so there's a few things. One of them would be a website as a resource, where you could go in there and find maps and articles, and there's so much information that's out there, but it has never really been collated properly. So to have some kind of website, which would obviously have to also have tremendous firewalls, because I can imagine how many people would be trying to take it down, where anybody who's interested in learning something, or anyone who's interested in teaching what we teach, could go there and refer to it, because there's just so much information. There's a limit at what you can do in an hour, and to be able to send people. So I do that on my own. I give people book lists, and but also not that many people have the patience or the time to read books, but there are many articles written by tremendous people like Professor Eugene Kontorovich and others, and Avi Bell and others that have things out there. And the other thing that I would do is try and get groups to come into Judea and Samaria. It is incredibly difficult. Let's say the Birthrights or many of the major organizations,
they rarely cross the green line.
They won't come into Judea and Samaria, and they say it's for political reasons. But the bottom line is that how can we expect them to connect to our history, to understand what the Jewish communities, aka settlements, are, if they never even see them? And when I have had the opportunity to take people, let's say into the Shomron, let's say to near where you live, to Shiloh, which is just such a phenomenal site where the tabernacle was, and inevitably one of the comments that I'll get is, wow, there's so much open land. If this was really about peace and coexistence, there's room for everyone. And not only that, but the mansions of the so-called poor Palestinian Arabs, they're like, what's going on? And you can't make this up.
Eve,
they see it for themselves.
If I had some money,
That's what you would do.
Helicopters.
Whatever it is get people to see it, because people are being denied information. And when you're being denied information, and they're not going to fight about it, because there's also this fear idea, oh, well, they don't want to take me in there because it's dangerous. So I'm not going to go to Hebron because it's dangerous. And I hate that argument. Because first of all, everything is dangerous. Okay. You know, one of the things that I really try and pound home to people is that when you go to an airport today, you are being humiliated by the jihadists. Because every time you take off your shoes and all this terrible security things that we have to go through, is all about jihad. And they're humiliating us all the time. And that's what they've said to me, even though we don't realize it. So the world can be a dangerous place. And anybody who thinks that they know how to protect themselves from anything is just kidding themselves. We're trying the best we can. It's not a reason to not come into Judea and Samaria, areas which I feel are much safer. I mean, I go to Chicago and I go to other places, and every place, you know, every area, you're just deluding yourself if you think that you're safe in any area. So to come and see for yourselves, that to me is of paramount importance. And then you can start making some decisions, or not even decisions, but starting with some opinions, maybe based on fact, and not how it's filtered to you through CNN or NBC or the myriad organizations who, for their own reasons, and some of it is just plain old simple anti-Semitism, are going to do whatever they can to make Israel always look like the bad guy in the situation.
Okay. Until that time, we hope that everybody has enjoyed this part of the program. And now we move into contemporary politics. We cannot avoid, Eve, the fact that a plan now has been presented to the public.
Right.
I didn't get to read all 181 pages.
Some of it was pictures.
Some was pictures and maps and charts.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm sure your listeners would like to hear, okay, we've heard everything from almost from birth until almost her 59th birthday. What now? What are you thinking?
So,
Trump, Netanyahu, what?
So I have to admit that I watched the ceremony where Trump laid out the plan, and also Bibi, sobbing the entire time. I was trying to figure out why I was crying. There were a few different reasons. A woman cries. It doesn't, as you know, you're married for a long time. It doesn't have to be just about one thing. One of them was the unequivocal praise that the leader of the free world, whether you like him or not, Trump is the leader of the free world, had for our little country. And not just, for how Israel is really a powerhouse in so many ways, and also mentioning the biblical attachment to the land, not just security and not just the so-called quote unquote practical ideas, but really acknowledging the biblical tie here. And I was listening to him speak, and I was thinking it was just the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which is not that long ago, and where, the remnants of European Jewry are crawling out of the concentration camps and the ovens and are nothing in the eyes of the world. Nothing. I mean, even the refugees, it's years before there's a place to go, and years before the British finally leave the mandate and allow the doors of the land of Israel finally to be opened up, something that should have been done
Just let me
many
ask
years
a second
before.
here. Have you been to Auschwitz, Eve?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
My husband went years ago as the doctor for a yeshiva group, and he asked me to come with him. And it was a very, very difficult trip to Poland. I refused to eat any fruits and vegetables because I kept thinking to myself, like they were grown in the ashes of my people. And also going to Auschwitz, where I know that I had family members, my father's family, where many of them died. So it's an incredibly difficult trip. I think everybody should do it once. But as the plane left Poland, I got up and washed my hands, as you do when you're leaving a cemetery, because for me it is just one big Jewish cemetery, and it's an awful, miserable place, and the people look miserable, and they should look miserable. So that was a difficult trip, and I definitely was there. But I'm listening to Trump talking about it and thinking about the intervening years. I was very proud of our prime minister, even though I vote for Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked because they promote more of what I'm feeling vis-a-vis Judea and Samaria, and I have disappointments with him over what he has done over the last few years. There is no getting around the fact that he is an extraordinary leader, that he has put Israel when it comes to the economy and relations with countries. Different place. Somebody that can talk to Putin and Trump, and he's really he really he really has brought Israel to a very. So I was proud of him as I was watching this. I was also crying for all the people who've been killed since all these misbegotten agreements. For whom, even if this one does lead to some kind of peace, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute, for whom it's too late. And it was just a very emotional time. I keep getting caught. I'm reading a lot of things that people are writing, people for whom I have tremendous respect, who are dead set against this agreement. How dare we acknowledge even that there could be a Palestinian state? How dare we willingly give up parts of the Holy Land? On the other hand, there are people for whom I have also tremendous admiration, like Professor Moish Kopel, who I just interviewed a few weeks ago, and Carolyn Glick, and people who are saying, look, this is a good deal as long as we hold the other side to it. And that's really, I think, the crux of the issue. Oslo might have worked also had we not looked past the terror. They were supposed to stop being terrorists.
Absolutely.
But when they started blowing up buses, we were told, oh, these people are sacrifices for peace. And the so-called Palestinians were never made to do what they were supposed to do, what they had signed on doing. And that's my fear about this, is that we think that we're doing something conditionally, they have to do X, Y, or Z, and then they don't do it, and we still give them what they wanted anyway. And that's what I hope would not happen here. And there's also, of course, a lot of the unknowns. This is Trump's plan. But what if he's not president 6 months from now? Does the next president of the United States hold to it or say to Israel, you've already left these areas, so that's a fait accompli, and you're not coming back? And also what's going to happen here in Israel? We also have elections again. And so there's a lot of unknowns here, and I really am torn. I would say that at least right at this minute, I'm more pro the agreement than against, because I think that we need to start somewhere. We need to put sovereignty on the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. I'm tired of living under military occupation, which is really who is living. It's the Jews living under military occupation.
We have an administration that's run by a military governor, actually.
And it's ridiculous on so many levels, some of them having nothing to do with ideology, which I've spoken about on the show before, having to do with the environment and road safety and all these things. We need the Jordan Valley locked up. We cannot in any way, shape, or form allow any kind of infiltrations from the east. And Israel needs to be in charge of the security there. But I think Israel needs to be in charge of the security all over the country. I'm sorry, but I don't trust my Arab neighbors. And I'm sorry to give it over in a generalized term. I'm sure that the lady that I'm going to see at the supermarket at the Gush Etzion Junction later on today, while we're each doing the shopping for our family weekend, is probably a lovely human being who just wants for her children what I want from mine. But as a collective, and as through reflected by their leadership, both religious and political, the onus is on them to prove to us that this is what they want, that they don't want to replace Israel with Palestine, that terror is not their goal, and that they don't believe they'd rather kill Jews than actually have a better life for themselves. What's interesting here, though, is where it puts the Israeli left. Not just the Israeli left, but I would say the American left. Because to some degree, we're calling their bluff. And they've been saying for years that they want a Palestinian state that's democratic and that has all this economic opportunity. And here, $50 billion is on the table. As long as they vow to stop killing people, how can the left be against this agreement?
Eve, if I can interject.
Please.
It's one other thing. It's that, as you know, over the years, we've been blamed for having no plan.
Yes.
And now that we come up with a plan, they're trying to tear it down. In other words, it's only their way, or it's only the Arab way. And now we have a different playing field. We have to play. It's not going to be easy to run to get your touchdown, but it does give an opportunity. One thing, though, and I want to hear what you think about this. Trump has said 4 years. I'll wait 4 years. Mm-hmm. I think some sort of mechanism should be in place that shortens that 4 years, the more they say no. Mm-hmm. But
look, well, for a long time, I mean, I remember saying many, many years ago, and people saying, oh, you're like such a racist, that when there was terrorism, the village that the terrorist came out of, and it takes a village to raise a child, right, should be destroyed. Nobody killed, but there's a week, you have a week's notice, you're out of here, because clearly this place is, if you didn't actually aid and abet him, by not outing him, you enabled him to do his terrorism. And maybe if that would have happened a few times, then the terrorism would have gone away, or maybe not completely, but at least to a great degree. Not because people suddenly started singing Hatikva and loving Israel, but because they didn't want to lose their own homes. And maybe it's my degree in psychology, and maybe it's just my practical side, and maybe it's experience of having raised many very, very different children, because I'll still say, with all the magnificent teachers that I've had over the years, my children have been the greatest teachers that I've ever had, especially when it comes to human behavior, or misbehavior, as it were. Maybe that would have stopped it. Okay, it's not pretty and it's not nice, but the bottom line is we want to stop bad behavior. And when you want to stop bad behavior, you have to be speaking in the terms of the people who are doing it and what's going to mean something to them. And so speaking and projecting our values onto a region where it really doesn't apply to a great degree has not been effective. So I agree with you. The 4 years is a long time. So I would like to see a situation where if you haven't stopped pay to slay, right? If you haven't stopped paying terrorist families within the next 6 months, then Israel takes over more of the area. And then in another time period, if you, whatever it is, all these things. If you don't stop incitement, if you don't take off from the television what's really brainwashing your little children to feel that they need to be killing Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then incrementally we will keep going. And instead of, look, one of the things that has been so bad about all the previous agreements and is that, and I think Amit Segal wrote it very well, we were told land for peace. So we gave up the tangible, we gave up the land for an agreement, for a feeling that never happened. Quite the opposite happened, but you've already given up the land. So I think it has to happen the other way now, is we start annexing and putting sovereignty on the land. And if they want any kind of entity of their own at the end of the day, they're finally going to have to give us what we define
faster than later.
Yeah, it has to completely be flipped because the other way hasn't worked. And I just have to interject something that might not be popular, what I'm going to say here right now, as opposed to everything else that I say, which is that I would also like to see at some point admissions of apology. I don't even know if that is enough from anybody who's involved with Oslo. I think Oslo was possibly the crime or one of the crimes of the 20th century. And it is so clear now, Oslo and leaving Gaza and all the other things that were done. And at the very minimum, a basic sense, because there's this hubris that's out there of these people who foisted these plans on us that took into consideration nothing.
Not only were they political failures, but they cost so much in human life.
That's what I mean. Right. The political failures, but the main part is the cost in human life. And it's something that I say when I'm with groups as well, when we talk about the tribe of Judah and the fact that the fourth brother gets the kingship. And a big part of this, and this I take from Yoram Chazoni's excellent philosophical books, is that he admitted he was wrong. That a leader is not supposed to be perfect or even a tzaddik, even, just like a great guy, a righteous man. He's somebody who stands up and says, I made a mistake. And Judah is the classic example of doing that on more than one occasion where he owns up. And I think that would make me feel a whole lot better about our leadership if some of the people, and some of them are gone now, so Shimon Peres is never going to be able to apologize for what I think are some of the devastating things that he did to this country. But the other people who are still walking and talking, I think, a lot of us, at least saying, I was wrong.
Eve, we're going to be wrapping up now. So we've done a lot of your past.
Mm-hmm.
We've had your opinions now on the present. So where do you see Eve Harow in another 5 years?
Oh my, what a question. Hopefully not having had Botox shots, which I know most women my age are already going down to, and I'm holding fast and not putting poison into my body. So there's that aspect of the feminine side of things, trying to keep myself together, healthy and strong so that I can do what I want to do, because it does come down to that, to be able to physically do it. And a lot of that is Hashem keeping me together, and my doing my part as well. So that's the first thing. And that, that my husband and my children and the people that I love, that my family continues to grow. I've got one other grandchild on the way, and that everyone is really healthy and whole. With their issues, as everybody has, but the main things is not the really devastating tragedies that have sadly happened, car accidents and other things that have happened to people around me that that are always going to be worrisome in the back of my mind. I would like to be living in a city that if I'm still there, that is a recognized part of the state of Israel. I would, of course, love it if our neighbors realized that they're going to get nothing by continuing war on us, and so they'd put their weapons down.
They can get so much more.
They can get so much more, but then I think to myself, well, what I just said involves the legitimization of hash in Israel, because I respect them enough in the sense of knowing their deep history, their deep attachment to their religion, to know that that would be a virtual impossibility for them to give up, at least in a short term. I wish them well, but I need to keep my country safe from that kind of behavior. So I hope the region is in a different place, and that the bad guys go away, and that everybody in this region, I don't wish ill on the people living in Damascus or in Cairo. I hope everybody is fine. So that would be nice to see. Realistically speaking, though, I hope that I'm still doing what I'm doing. I hope that I'm still walking and talking the land, and that there's more recognition in the world of the importance of Israel and of the Jewish people. And I worry about the rest of the world. I'm not so sure about where the United States and other countries, and definitely Europe are going to be in 5 years, because I don't think you can't protect yourself or start working against the enemy if you don't recognize who the enemy is. And I'm concerned about that, and that they don't recognize that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I guess to just continue doing what I'm doing it better, doing it more effectively, and that other people, wake up a little bit. I think that you and I are privileged beyond measure to be living in this land, to be seeing prophecy unfold at breathtaking speed every single day. Sometimes I just have to sit with that for a minute. The tremendous time we live in.
And the past being uncovered with all the archaeology you and I are involved in.
Oh my goodness, it's just amazing. This place that was just talked about in the north, possibly one of the Omrid palaces in the Jezreel Valley, and how they distributed food, and really getting an awareness and an understanding of what happened here. And so it's just really the privilege of my life, and Hodu Hashem Ki Tov. I really just thank God for every minute that's good, and for the strength and the coping abilities to deal with the minutes that are not so good, and that more people are aware of the very big battle that the whole world is fighting right now, and not just Israel, but that where the Jewish people go tends to be where everybody follows.
And with that, we're going to be signing off. This was your guest broadcaster, Yisrael Medad, interviewing rejuvenated Eve Harow on the anniversary of 200 podcasts that she has put up on the air. And we wish her the very best, at least for the next 5 years that we've been talking about right now. Thank you, Eve, for being the guest. Thank you to Ben Bresky for being our executive producer and overall technician. And everybody, have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Wink. I can't think of anybody who is more appropriate and has been more important in my life in seeing my development as an advocate for Israel than you. So I appreciate you taking the time and effort to do this. And I know we'll be talking a lot more over the years. You're one of my number one resources on all things involved with Israel. So I appreciate it. If my listeners want to feedback, Eve at thelandofisrael.com. You can go to my website, eveharow.com, and see what I'm up to. And to be in touch and to keep listening. And I just appreciate this opportunity to be on the other side of the mic.
Humble honor.
This is Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Take care, everybody. Shavua Tov. And let's hope for whatever it is, that it should be good for all of us. If Israel, puts sovereignty on the communities, whatever it is that's going to be coming up in the next week or two, it is never boring. So take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
The question is, why are the Jews there in the first place? The Jewish people have been yearning to return to their ancient homeland for a long time.
The Yishai Fleischer Show, the voice of a new generation of pro-Israel activists.
And there's only two kinds of minorities in the Middle East, armed or unarmed.
Inspiring minds to think differently.
That jihadism doesn't just attack Jews. It attacks Christians, and it mostly attacks Muslims.
Inspiration, spirituality, and politics.
So first and foremost, this country is here to defend Jewish people and to live in its ancestral homeland.
Listen to the Yishai Fleischer Show every week.